Hi, I'm Thomas. I am, as you can probably hear, Danish. I work in the Lego agency in Billund in Denmark. Here's me from the, if you want to have the profile rather than unfast. And thanks, Rick, for shouting out with the book. And let me just kick off by showing you a short video, hopefully with sound.
K.
K.
No, that's a K.
Y. O. M. U. Trust you.
So that is one of my favorite illustrations of our work in user research with children, and why I was also so exceptionally fond of Rick's invitation to talk about user research and with the focus on extremes, because in some ways you could say it's fairly extreme to study with kids. This is my portfolio, or some of it. We have so many different platforms at Lego where we communicate with children, with families, with adults, with fans, etc. From the top left, you can see a magazine that we produce called Lego Life Magazine, which is a regular old magazine that's sent in the mail, and where kids read about their Lego interests. The next one is what we call the Lego Brand Catalog. It's a 80-page pamphlet that goes out in 15 million copies twice a year. That is inspiring many Christmas wish lists and birthday wish lists, etc. Lower left is a bunch of apps that we produce, just some of them in the center with the Guggenheim Museum, just to emphasize that a mere 35% of our sales goes to adults who buy to other adults or to themselves. So that's a huge number, and it's increasing. And on the right, we have at the top our Lego Life app for kids, social media, so safe social media space, maybe the first social media for children, and then lego.com for kids in the lower right area. And also we run a bunch of campaigns. This is a campaign video we worked extensively on understanding how this particular video resonated with the audience. I'll put the link in the chat a little later. No, I did not want to start it now. I need to go back to, maybe, am I still sharing my PowerPoint? Yep, great. No, I don't want to click the link. Oh my God, what do I do? Here I am. So hopefully this is displaying a tablet with some images from Lego Life and just some headlines from the type of user research we do. We do sort of early on innovative fuzzy front end, which I'll show more details about. We usually work very iteratively and agile and quick and dirty, but sometimes also the opposite, which I'm assuming must be slow and clean. Not sure really how that works, but we work over all these very many platforms, from PlayStations and sort of console games to web to tablet to in the store experiences. So it's really broad. And we try to include the competition in our studies and work globally. And we also try to have a sort of a user experience score, also a kids experience score, which is something I talk about in my book if you're more interested. But what Lego works around is the market launch on the very right. That is, you could say, maybe Christmas, to make sure that consumers are given the boxes or the toys that they're interested in. But you can see all the blue circle work that's sort of very iterative and very fuzzy is where a lot of my experimentation happened. Just to give you some raw numbers, if Lego produce maybe 350 or 400 products a year that end up on the shelves, at the very early on, you can see there's so many more ideas that come up that needs to be considered, studied, vetted. I like to think of it as the Hunger Games of Lego, where we have our product owners come to these stage gate meetings and pitch their ideas, and some of them get thrown out, some survive, and then sort of slowly but surely matures. So we are very much an old-fashioned manufacturing company in that sense. We're not like a small, nifty software company. Here's just an example of extremes that I work with. I work with the visually impaired. We have a product called Lego Braille bricks, where you can see the Braille alphabet has been embossed on Lego bricks, and comes sort of in a little box with the bricks, 240 of them, I think. And you can, for the seeing, there are some tasks, but also obviously some tasks or some ideas of how to bring them to life and how to learn to use this alphabet inside. So this is sort of my very messy agenda. I'd like to talk about extremes, and extremes in quotation marks. I'd like to touch upon my specific key area of studies, which is kids with their demographics, studying upbringing, culture, passions, cognitive skills, physical skills. But I also like to bring in the context. And I'm not really sure I can do all of it in the time that I have been allotted. So I'll see how far we get. But just to open up this thinking of extreme user experience research with extremes, this is a very common Lego box. And I imagine most of you are probably adults in this room. So you probably looked at the box pretty much as the parents did on the left using eye tracking. But if you look on the right, you can instantly see how differently kids approach this stimulus, this material. They did not look at the text. They just totally ignored it. They hardly looked at our labeling in the top left, but they really liked to look at the minifigure. What was he wearing? What was his facial expressions? What was going on? What was the play invitation? So if the kids had redesigned the box, it would look like this instead. But you know, since it's not usually the kids who fund the money for the boxes, they don't get so much of a say. And here's another example from just bringing you into the mind of the kids, and also maybe taking you out of your own extreme. So you wouldn't probably, I imagine, spend much time figuring out this equation. But if I told you this was the answer, that 10 plus 20 is 2, that 30 plus 40 is also 2, etc., you would probably raise an eyebrow. But that's because you're not thinking like a kid. A small kid pre-math, pre-learning, etc., so a 4 or 5-year-old maybe, or even a 6-year-old, will come to the conclusion that you can color those circles. So that means there's 2 circles in 10 plus 20. And this is just to bring you out of your adult understanding and all your faculties and your cognitive skills, all the things you've learned that tells you what reality is. And that is exactly the challenge here. As a researcher, we come in like Steve Buscemi and try to be kids, but we are so not kids. And that means what we see, what we perceive, the knowledge we have sort of hinders every kind of studies that we do. So we are sort of extremes in a kid's world. We have extreme cognitive abilities, extreme background, but also there's a lot of things we don't know. But just to talk a little about where would we like to be, I like to use this Csikszentmihalyi model of where on the one level you have skills and the other you have challenges. And what we strive to achieve in Lego is the top right corner where it says flow. We'd like the skill level to be high and the challenge level to be high, but be matched, be balanced, so that the kids lose track of time and place and sort of feel they're learning, feel they're experiencing things, but also that it happens at a reasonable and fun level. It's not too easy and boring, but it's in fact challenging enough to spur their interest. So how do we get flow? Sometimes we also design for other experiences. This is a product line that came out 3 or 4 years ago called the Hidden Side, where it's actually explicitly designed to the older kids, the kids that are 8 and older, and come up with a scary theme about monsters and haunting and ghosts, and be maybe scary to the younger kids. So in this case, the research challenge was extreme in it has to be too scary for the 6-year-old, that the 8-year-olds felt it was cool, it was scary, it was tickling enough. So that's, I think, a good example of extremes. So now I'd like to talk about how extremes can be helpful, for instance, when recruiting respondents. And I'll take as an example this Duplo Train app that we have. And the brief we got was, let's test this with the intended audience. So you saw it was an app. Obviously, that's the service. Service allows a kid to remote control a train, but also just simply to play with it. But the app sits, of course, on the platform, a tablet, and that has its own level of interface. So which should we focus on? Who is the audience? What are the extremes? What is the mainstream here? And as an aside, we could look at other kinds of platforms that exist in the world. Here are just some examples from my book where I say, some platforms like TV sets, if you take sort of a regular progression from being a novice to being an advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and then expert, you'd expect a lot of people to be pretty expert on TV sets. Most of us probably are proficient, at least us in the boomer generation. I don't know about the young ones anymore. Whereas pianos, probably most people in the population are novices, few are beginners, competent, proficient, or expert. And with a little nod to Don Norman, we can say door handles. We all come across doors, except toddlers don't maybe know door handles as well as we do. But very few people have less skills there, and most are experts, if not all of us are experts in door handles, etc. You could continue this parallel. So when we talk about extremes, I would say that it's extremely uncommon to find a novice door handle user, whereas it could be extremely ordinary to be an expert. So you wouldn't always say that extreme and expert are opposite. You could sometimes say expertise is sometimes whatever we think is the most common. So here's just to show some examples. I had the example of the Duplo app. So if we were to find these toddlers and test this app, we could go for those who have high, in the top right corner, high skills on the service, that is the app, and high skills on the platform, which is the tablet. Or we could find any of the other ones. So we could, in each of those cases, say, if we take the top right, it's a child who knows how to use the tablet or the iOS, and who knows how to use that particular app. Should we study with those? Or should we study with those who don't know really how to use a tablet? Not a lot of those, maybe, but who do know the Duplo Train app, maybe not so many of those, etc., just to build sort of a framework to remind us what we're testing. But then what we came back with was, that's all fine and well, knowledge about tablets, knowledge about services and platforms, but what if they're not interested in it? So you need to encompass that particular interest in remote controlling a train or playing with the train on an app. So this is a way to put a framework around these with skills and the various things that we need to consider when we talk about extremes. We have the different kinds of skills. I mentioned the service skill, the platform skill, could also be interest in Duplo, could also be interest in some of the figures that, or IPs that live in the Duplo universe. It could be an animal or humans, etc. It could also be other factors. So let me just give you some example of what the client would expect to be the mainstream, that, some skills are in the middle, some skills are low, some interests are high, etc. So maybe if this is the mainstream, we would define the extreme as the opposite. So you come up with all these factors and describe sort of a skill landscape. But then you would find, so this looks to be covering the mainstream and the extreme, but then I drew a line in between all of this that you could say, so it's not the mainstream, it's not the extreme. What is this then? It sort of raises a lot of questions that kind of impossible for my product owner to answer, and this is what we face as researchers. So here are some ways to come across that. You probably have heard of the Pareto principle, where we talk about very little part of outcomes have so many consequences that that 20% of the outcomes comes from, 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the causes, and that a small percentage has sort of an outside effect. Is that one approach? Another approach is simply taking the bell curve that says there's an average, there's a market, and there's a bell curve. Let's assume that skills or interests are following the bell curve. And the bell curve came out of IQ tests that were run and sort of come up with these nice sort of subsegments of the population. You can, when you go on the internet, you can find things like this description of how to put some words around what these different areas of the audience are. And I put as an aside that you could say, as a principle, as opposed to maybe just simply saying skills, you could also say that the skills that are extreme have different values. And if we take the ones on the left, those who seriously underperform, you would probably say they, from a cognitive level with kids using a Duplo app, you could say maybe they're not interesting. But I would say, on the other hand, maybe they reflect the novice experience, the first time experience. Whereas also you could say the top 10% with excellent performance, we shouldn't include those because they are way too smart. But maybe actually purposely including them will give us an idea of what should be the next level, or what should be the next version, or maybe what should we expect from the generations who move into this system. Will they gradually become expert? Will they over time simply master those, or have that? Can we expect that kind of performance from the kids moving into it? So my product manager would say, let's test with the 50% in the middle, or the 60 or the 70% in the middle, where I would say, no, let's test with the 10% with the fewest capabilities, or the lowest or the highest bar to entry and the lowest capabilities, and also those with the most, simply to inform us of what can come next and what should be happening next. So this is just a way to approach this skill. And then I think I've almost spent my time, but just want to add another layer of complexity when we talk about extremes. Sorry, Francis, if I'm taking too much of the time so far. This is from a book I wrote with a lot of other people, and came out in 2009. It talked about global user research. On the left, you can see, maybe I can use this. Can I point with that? Is there a pointer in? I don't know. I'm pointing for myself now. I'm pointing at the respondent on the left that says a verbalization. That would be what we would want to study. In this case, the kid is interacting with the system. In this case, the Duplo app system. And when you it happens somewhere under instructions from a moderator. Maybe the instructions are not very explicit. Maybe the instructions are simply play with this. But if you add the global layer, so I would be the evaluator commissioning a moderator in, say, France or Portugal or another area where I don't master the language. You could even say England. I would have an interpreter to help me understand what the moderator said and also what the respondent said, et cetera, et cetera. So on the top right, in the cultural implications, you see the dotted lines that show there's so many areas where culture has implications. But I would argue that exactly the same happens when we talk about extremes, that the extremes happen in the exact same area where the cultural implications are manifest, so that you should plan around the biases that exist in all those levels of interaction with your respondents. And so one thing I probably didn't underline enough was that for us adults, we could read the math expression with the 10 plus 20, etc. Remember, that